Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us at the 33rd Annual California Small Farm Conference. My name is Paul Towers. I'm the Executive Director of CAF, the Community Alliance with Family Farmers, and so appreciate you taking the time to be with us today in our conversation around regenerative ag and the roots and reliance upon Indigenous knowledge systems. I want to really thank all of our panelists here today. We'll go ahead and let them introduce themselves, and really want to thank all of our sponsors that have helped make this conference possible. There's still a couple more days of conference, so please stay tuned for exciting workshops. Feel free to attend the virtual expo hall, which you can see linked in the chat. And know that CAF, the Community Alliance with Family Farmers, is doing our best to make sure that this conference is coming to you free. And so please consider a small donation to the California Small Farm Conference to keep this conference going year in and year out. And then also to let you know, this workshop will be recorded and posted on CAF's YouTube channel, and links will be shared in a follow-up email. In addition, this is an interactive session. So after we hear from our panelists, there'll be some questions, then an opportunity for you to ask questions. Please make sure that you put those questions directly in the chat box. So those will come up as an opportunity actually in the Q&A section of in your lower right of your screen to ask those questions, and we'll get to those when we can. And note that everyone is muted except for our presenters at the moment. They'll be speaking to you shortly, but everyone else will be on mute for the moment. And yeah, I just want to thank everyone again for being here. This is an exciting opportunity, an important panel. I'm coming to you here from Sacramento on unceded Miwok and Nisenan land, and just excited to co-learn with you and Keir and the rest of the panel about Indigenous knowledge systems. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Keir.
Hello everybody, I'm Keir Johnson-Reyes. I'm Osage, which is tribe out in northeastern Oklahoma. I reside on Nisenan lands just outside of Sacramento. I work for Intertribal Agriculture Council as the National Director for the Technical Assistance Network, as well as a Pacific Region Technical Assistance Specialist. I'm really grateful to be here, and thank you so much to Paul and CAF who approached us about doing this panel, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity to talk about these really important topics relating to Indigenous knowledge systems as being at the origin and the root of the regenerative ag movement. And I really want to make sure that we provide as much time as possible, of course, to the panelists. We're so grateful for those of you all joining as panelists today. Basically, we're going to do something a little unique in the sense that instead of just going around doing introductions in a standard way, we're going to actually go through and do presentations that will embed the introduction into the presentation. And we're going to start with Chairman Lopez. We'll then go to Ms. Meagan Baldi, and then we're hoping that Cheyenne Stone from Fort Independence is able to join as well. We're still waiting for her, but hopefully she is third in the mini presentation list here, so we'll be able to hopefully provide her a little bit of time to sign on. So without further ado, I will go ahead and if everybody's good with that, actually, if you all have, I think you all have the features. Go ahead, Rick. You can go ahead and pull up your presentation if you're good with that. If not, then I can go ahead and do that.
Can you all see that?
Yeah, it looks great.
Okay. Yes. Chairman Lopez, you're on.
Okay, thank you. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. I'm very excited and happy and honored to be speaking today at this conference. My name is Valentin Lopez, and I'm the chairman of the Amah Mutsun tribal band. Our tribe is comprised of the descendants of the indigenous peoples that were taken to missions, San Juan Bautista and Santa Cruz, along the central coast of California. our people have been here since millennia, and you talk to the anthropologists, and they date us being here going back 15 to 20,000 years. And we're also identified by a lot of people as hunters and gatherers. And nothing could be further from the truth. And actually, it's quite insulting when they consider us, when we're referred to as hunters and gatherers. Our people were very sophisticated, accomplished, land stewards and land managers, and they maintain these lands in a very sustainable way. Our territories, you can see in the next slide, are the territories of our tribe. They include the territory. You know, I descend from mission I don't descend from the missions. Our people were taken to Mission Santa Cruz, and the Santa Cruz tribes in the language that was spoken along that was Awaswas. We believed for many years that we descended from the Awaswas, and we found out in 2019 that we do not descend from the Awaswas. We descend from the tribe at the base of the mountain that divided the territories. And so, but we had a lot of efforts going on in those lands, and there's no known survivors from the Awaswas. And so because of that, our work along the coast of Santa Cruz continues to this day. And our territory goes inland on the eastern side of the Santa Cruz Mountains, and includes the towns of Morgan Hill, Gilroy, Hollister, and down to Pinnacles National Park. That's our traditional territory. Next slide, please. Our creation story tells us that it is our responsibility, you know, the Creator gave us the responsibility to take care of Mother Earth and all living things. And our people very intentionally worked hard to fulfill that directive and obligation from Creator. We recognize that all plants have an obligation to take care of a community. And that community includes the fungus, the insects, the birds, the four-legged, and people. So whenever we talk about we took care of food resources, it wasn't just our food resources, it was the food resources of all wildlife as well. And the way that we took care of these plants is that we would grow them in patches. We would see where a plant was working at, was growing at, and we'd say, this is where the plant wants to be. This is where Creator put that plant. And so we're going to steward and take care of this plant in that fashion. We also learned a lot about the plants and what they provided. As a result of that, we have over nearly 100 food plants identified. The berries, the seeds, the bulbs, the corms, the nuts, etc. Over nearly 100 food plants identified, as I said. And our people tended them in a way where they did not require irrigation, and they became very hardy. The grasslands where our seeds grew, a lot of those root systems went 15 to 20 feet deep, and that made them very resistant to fire, to drought, and to flooding. And it also made the way we took care of them to take care of that community. They also were able to take care of, they also became very resistant to disease. And today, a lot of the food crops around the world use the rootstock of the California native plants. You can see a lot of our native food plants right here with these flowering plants. Those are our food plants. Next slide, please. The coast of Santa Cruz was actually a very biodiverse coastal prairie. It was recognized as being one of the most biodiverse landscapes in North America. But whenever the colonizers came, the Spanish and mission period, and then the Mexican period, followed by the American period. All three of them outlawed burning. And as a result of that, we lost our prairies. Little by little, the shrublands would move in, followed by the Doug fir, and then followed by the redwoods and the oaks and the other wooded forests and stuff. So most of our prairie is the coastal prairie has been taken over, and that takes over that the biodiversity that was there. In 2006, our ancestors said we have to go back to taking care of Mother Earth. That's our responsibility. And so we've been working to restore the knowledge and to restore the coastline and to restore our native landscapes. And that means and to restore our foods and our medicines and our basketry and crafting plants. And that's what we work on today. I'll stop there. Thank you very much. And Rick, you should take a minute to introduce yourself, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rick Flores. I am not a native Californian. My ancestry is Filipino, Hawaiian on my dad's side and Irish on my mom's side. But I've been working as an ally with the Amah Mutsun Tribal Band and the Amah Mutsun Land Trust for a little over 10 years now. And my professional background is with native plants, and I run the Amah Mutsun Relearning Program here at the UC Santa Cruz Arboretum, where we're assisting the tribe in these cultural revitalization efforts through the relearning of native plants and traditional ecological knowledge. Thank you for having me here today.
Thank you both so much for your introductions. I'll turn it over now to Meagan. Would you like me to share your presentation, or do you got that handy there, Meagan?
Yeah, if you can pull it up, that'd be perfect.
Sure, just a sec.
Hi, everybody. My name is Meagan Baldi. I am a Hoopla tribal member living in Hoopla, California. I am also of Yurok descent. Our place here in the Hoopla Valley has actually been called our home forever because all of our people have not been displaced. We've always been in the valley here. Next slide. So Hoopla people, they were traditional gatherers and hunters and fishermen. You can see on this map of Humboldt County, the neighboring tribes around us. If you go kind of towards the middle and towards the east, you'll see Hoopla Willow Creek area, and that's our ancestral land in that direction. We sustained ourselves on acorns and berries and mushrooms and just different things that we gathered. On the right of the screen, you'll see a lady with her burden basket on. That is how we traditionally went out and gathered either our wood, our berries, our acorns. We carried them in baskets that were made. Some of the baskets that were utilitarian were either made by women or males, just depended on the basket style. And on the bottom, we have a Hoopla man fishing with a net. Basically, salmon and acorns are staples here in Hoopla. And there's so many benefits to eating both of those in together. And so those are the foods that really, really kept our people in the place that we are since the beginning of time. Next slide. So like I said before, we traditionally grew up on berries, mushrooms, acorns, salmon, medicinals. So in these pictures, we have gooseberries, huckleberries, fish that we smoke and we can. On the bottom is Gnostic tea, or it's commonly known as yerba buena, and mushrooms and acorns. Our traditional land management was to be stewards of the land and to actually steward these foods. And basically, you know, when we would go up and gather, it was always told to us by the head man of our village how much we can gather, when we can gather, you know, what it was that we could be gathering and in the areas that we could gather in. So that was basically the way that it was laid out. The same with our fishing. We used to put up a weir across the river, and all the headmen from all the villages would go through and say, this many fish to this family, this many fish to that family, and this many fish to this family. And that was our stewardship. Those headmen and the people that were skilled into those places of leadership would be able to tell the Hoopla people or the villages where they were, you know, how much to take from the land so as not to molest it, and, you know, the proper protocols of gathering while we were up in the mountains. Next slide. So I always like to use this picture because this is where it really shifted for us as Hoopla people. Here is, in this picture, this is Fort Gaston. Fort Gaston was established back in 1868 here in Hoopla. It was established because homesteaders that came here with the prospectors that were from the gold rush were afraid of the Hoopla people. So they wrote letters to the United States government, and the government sent out the army to Hoopla, and they established Fort Gaston. In 1868, we had a bunch of wars going on here locally, and then later on, because of the army not being as experienced and a lot of young people that they sent over, we were able to overcome them. And the way that we were able to overcome was through our skills and our stewardship of the land. So we knew how to go up into the hills, and we knew how to stay up there and eat from what was provided. I have a story that I read in history about how the army put out bags of flour to coax the Hoopla people out of the woods. And when they came back, the flour was dumped on the ground and the bag was gone. We've seen so much more utility in the bag as opposed to the flour. This picture right here, though, this was after the wars, and this is when the Hoopla Valley Reservation was established through the United States. There was a treaty. These ladies are here with their burden baskets. I don't know if they're prisoners. I don't know if they're there for rations, but I can just imagine them sitting there with their burden baskets and those blankets there, that it took a lot of humility, and it took a lot of sadness to be where they were at this moment. And I look at this picture to basically inspire myself that because of this power that these ladies had, I am here today. This humility and this sacrifice that they gave by sitting there in front of these non-natives, in front of these invaders, they're the reason why I'm here today. And so this is 1877. And like I said, I just like to look on it, and it gives me a lot of inspiration and passion to continue to do the work that I do. Next slide. So I know that in my introduction, I'm supposed to talk about the Dawes Allotment Act. So during the 1887, the United States government created the Dawes Allotment Act, or we like to call it the Land Stealing Act. Basically, they created an assimilation program from Native Americans to start being farmers and producers, and to basically be assimilated into a culture or a foreign culture. During that time, you know, it flipped us upside down, and we became land owners as opposed to land stewards. So that's a total different concept to us. And, you know, it was something that was very foreign. And then in the 1930s, 1934, the Indian Reorganization Act came into play, and it really, really totally flipped us upside down. And that was when tribal councils and tribal governments were formed, and the head people, the headmen, the way that we did things from the beginning really changed at that time. And so now we are trying to figure out how to get back to something similar to what we've done 10,000 plus years before contact to now. And so a lot of it is just teaching, education. working with one another, and that's part of my job. And that's something I try to instill in my children. So you can see there's a lot of pictures here. There's a lot of different things going on in these pictures, and this is just a little bit about myself. So in these pictures are myself with a young lady teaching her how to fillet salmon. My son and my husband, they're butchering up a pig that they raised. My daughter up here in the right-hand corner teaching another lady how to braid bear gas. My son down here in the corner, and he's cooking jam with his fellow friends that we did a jam class together. And then my son over here on the left on the bottom, they're teaching other kids how to fully dress a deer. And so those things are the things about myself and about my family that are really something I hold dear. And I just appreciate that we're able to do a lot of the things that we do as a family together in Hoopla when we're addressing a lot of issues like food security, food sovereignty. You know, my ride or dies are right on my side, and they basically love to do the work that we do. And so this is kind of coming into, you know, how we used to be. You know, there was always people within our villages that had certain skills. Like, I'm not a basket person, but I'm a cook. My daughter, she likes doing basketry, so she's teaching those kinds of things, where for me, I'm teaching how to cook and do those kinds of things. There's certain skills that we all depended on as Indian people or as a village that helped the village go smoothly and go the way that it was, but it also helped the land. We were able to use our skills individually and steward our land. Next slide. And that's kind of my introduction in a nutshell, and I'll just pass it to the next person.
Thank you very much, Meagan. Thank you so much, Meagan, for that wonderful introduction. Cheyenne, would you like to share your screen at this point, or would you like me to?
You could go ahead and share the screen, please, Keir.
Yep. Wrong direction. Sorry, just a second, folks.
And Keir, can you pause right there? Awesome. So introduction. Manahu inaniane Cheyenne Stone, Nüümü Video, Tovo Wanamatu, Ihim Panatu Nu Agimana. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. My name is Cheyenne Stone, and I'm a member of the Big Pine Paiute tribe. I work for the Fort Independence Indian Reservation, which is 30 miles south of that, but my family ranges from Yosemite down to Lone Pine, up to Nevada and California. So a little about myself. I guess I never understood sovereignty until I met with my grandma at an older age. My grandma's currently 87 years old. So what she taught me was my first canning experience. And little did I know of that, I come from a family that has farmed and had their substance, I guess, subsidized by by themselves, because inherently we tended to the land. So growing up, we would go out onto our homeland because at the moment we reside on a reservation. So we would go to the mountains, we would go to our rivers and our waters, and we would tend to our land, we would pray to our land. So as an Indigenous person, I try to aim to promote individuals to build for themselves. So did my grandma in her generation. They had a brick cellar. They actually stored and canned their food. They had fruit trees. they were into agriculture. So the video that I'm going to show you is historically we tended to the land, and we are always part of the agriculture industry, but it was more for our survival than a job. We would share our resources. So today I still aim to tend to the land in order to provide a sustainable, resilient food system that feeds people while regenerating rather than depleting the planet. So I promote our people to be proactive, and we incorporate our traditional knowledge into that, into tending to our Mother Earth. So prior to contact, we utilized a lot of our baskets. As Meagan expressed earlier, we too here in the Owens Valley, which is also known as Paiute, we had burden baskets, which again, didn't deplete the planet. Rather, we tended to the willows and from our rocks that you'll see in some of my presentation to the baskets. Everything Mother Earth provided was how we sustained ourselves as our people. A lot of our holistic medicine and Hinadu area. So I'm going to go ahead and show the video, and then afterwards I'm just going to do a little bit more speaking. So yeah, Keir, if you could go ahead and just play the video.
And you want to play it from the beginning? I'm sorry. I jumped
Oh
the
yeah,
gun there.
sure. That works.
Hano to nana umpani kita uniki hanin. Hano to nana umpani kita uniki hanina 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 hanin. Hanina 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 hanina.
Awesome, thank you, Keir. So the video just it gives you a synopsis of how we currently sustain ourselves, as well as a historical look of how we sustain ourselves. Today, I incorporate a lot of our tribal ecological knowledge into my children's life, because that's how knowledge is passed down. Knowledge that I learned from my grandpa, he learned from his grandpa, and so forth. So today, we still sustain ourselves in some of our diet on acorn, which is very high in fat, as well as pine nuts. There's a time and a season, so that really factored into how our ancestors would sustain their diet. For currently, we have a small farm, and we do a lot of fruits and vegetables, and we have an orchard. For the tribe that I work for, we have about 2 to 3 acres of fresh fruits and vegetables, and we're always aiming to expand, because part of being a tribal member from any tribe in the Owens Valley, what I've noticed is what 2020 has taught all of us is that leading health disparities lead to the are the highest for American Indians. So 2020 certainly taught me, as well as my community, that our health is important, and our health begins with the food that we eat. So our tribe and locally, our people have started to incorporate fresh fruits and vegetables. And for a lot of our people, that means tending to their garden and harvesting their indigenous food depending on the season. So right now, there's a whole movement toward food sovereignty, which is awesome. But prior to food sovereignty, that was just our lifestyle of how us as Paiute lived. So I guess I'm going to go ahead and sum it up from there, and we will continue. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us today.
Thank you all so much for those introductions. And so for the remainder of our time, we're going to be going into a panel section. We're going to start off with questions specific to each of our panelists. given our time constraints, I'm gonna ask panelists to kind of keep in mind about 3 minutes at this point so we can play a little catch up in terms of responses. And then we'll go into a period for kind of collective responses where we can popcorn around. And then there'll be some time at the end for Q&A. I'll go ahead and pose the first question. This will be for Chairman Lopez and of course, Rick, if there's anything to add, by all means. But can you speak to the highly sophisticated land tending approaches that you spoke about in your introduction of your people and common misconceptions associated with the hunter-gatherer elements you described, as well as other labels and associations particular to California Native peoples? Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry. Regarding our land approaches, the first thing we have to all recognize is that Mother Earth is sacred, and the plants and the animals and the wildlife and the fish, etc., they're all sacred. And we have an obligation to maintain that sacredness first and foremost. And we do that with ceremony, we do that with prayer, we do that with reciprocity, we do that with song, singing, and listening. Those are all very important part of our tending practices. A good example of the highly sophisticated was the way that we would burn. A fire is very important to manage. We see fire as a gift to us from Creator. It's important for ceremony, for prayer, but for food, for warmth, for cooking, etc. And it was a sacred gift given to us from Creator. And we learn how to use it to manage landscapes and to manage our resources. Whenever we looked at a landscape, we would divide it into segments. It could be 5, 7, 9 segments, and then we would burn one segment each year. That first segment, you would get an abundance of seed plants because those seed plants, they need fire and they need warmth, so to help them germinate. And so we get an abundance of seed plants, and that would help wildlife, that would help birds, and that would help us. Seasonally, our diets would be 40% seed. That second year growth, you start getting these higher shoots. And those right there were a lot of our, those higher shoots were important food plants for us, but they were also important, very important food plants for the grazing animals, the deer, the elk, the antelope, etc. The third year, you start getting that bushier shoots and stuff like that. And that provided a lot of our materials that we used, a lot of our food plant materials. And it goes on, throughout these subsequent years and such. So fire was very important, and our people learned how to use it very effectively. The other thing that we learned is, as I said, the way that we took care of the plants, the way that we stewarded the plants, they developed very deep root systems, and they were very resistant to disease and flood and fire and stuff like that. And so there's a lot of interest now in restoring native plants, and our tribe works hard on that. And as I said, those plants right there represent our food plants and our medicine plants and our basketry plants. Our people did not migrate. They did not have to. We took care of the resources where we were at. And we took care, and so year round, we had the food resources we need. In the springtime, we would have the seeds, an abundance of seeds. And in the summertime, we would have the berries and the corms and the roots. And then later in the fall, we'd have the nuts and the acorns. And it wasn't just acorns that our people ate. We ate hazelnuts, buckeye. There's probably 7, 8 different nuts that were important food matters for our tribe. Rick, did you want to add anything to the year-round seasonality of our foods?
Well, I think you touched on that really well. Springtime was a time for spring grains and seeds. And then as the seasons moved on, the berries ripened and it was berry season, and then the nut harvest in the fall. That was very accurate, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I will say just a quick comment, to describe Native Californians as hunter-gatherers is incredibly inaccurate. What we know now, and what Native people have been telling us for a long time is that, they were sophisticated land managers. When you look at Western academia, they have this linear progression of human existence, and hunter-gatherers on one end and agrarian societies are on the other end. Well, Native Californians were operating somewhere in the middle of that. They were not hunter-gatherers, but they were also not farming. They were stewarding ecosystems and plants in place which sustain them and their cultures for thousands of years.
Well, so much. Anything else to add before moving on to the next panelist?
The thing with farming is domestication. We did not domesticate our plants or animals. And that's that's what differentiates our cultural resources from farming today.
Thank you so much. All right, we'll move on to Meagan. Meagan, can you talk a little bit about Hoopla People's role as land stewards and as world renewal peoples who maintain creation's balance and the recent, over the last 150 years, violent interruptions to this balance? You touched on some of that in your introduction, but anything else you'd like to say?
So, we did a Pacific Region Summit about 2 years ago. It was 2 years ago last week. Our dances, we called them the World Renewal Dances. And during that time, we had Nevada and Hawaii, and they were actually able to come and take part in our World Renewal Dance. What really stuck out about that is our dance leader. We're a Fix the World people, and it's so awesome that we have students and kids from all over that are here today, to partake in this dance. And that dance actually symbolizing bringing back balance to what is going on in our world. And it's called a jump dance. Basically, they're stomping on the ground, and they are stomping and praying so that everything can go back into balance, because after a time our world starts to shift. When it gets too much off of balance, it has to be brought back down into balance, and that's what the Fix the World people was about. And we're still seeing that today. And I like hearing Mr. Lopez's interpretation of saying hunting and gathering. He's absolutely right that that's not exactly who we were. Indian people were scientists. Probably some of the most sophisticated scientists in the world. We watch our world, we watch this earth, and we see, we still do that today. You can tell when it's a good acorn year, there might not be a good berry year. And why is that? We will see in the forest, it'll talk to us. We'll see different insects that weren't there that are coming back, that actually help to pollinate certain berries, certain herbs out in our forests. We watch that, we take eyes of that. And you can see when we're gathering mushrooms, that people will uncover a lot of different things and not recover it back up. So the less amount of we're out there and disturbing, the better it is. And we see that as a science thing, because we know that there's important microbes, there's important spores, there's important things in there that's going to bring back the food that we need the next year. But also we watch, okay, if it's a good acorn year, it's not going to be a good berry year. So, I'll have to supplement that in my family if that happens. And that's the way that we have been and will continue to do for generation upon generation. That's that stewardship, that's that maintaining, that's that scientific mind that we have as Indian people. A lot of this stuff has really changed for Indian people because of the fact that the Dawes Allotment Act, for one, has turned us from land stewards to land owners. That's a concept that we really still struggle with today. How does one own land? You know, we don't own land, we steward the land, we take care of the land, we're managers of this land. We don't see and understand that because we've only had that the last 150 years, right? Especially for Hoopla people, we've only had contact within the last 150 years. The Indian Reorganization Act, again, created a disruption in this system because it took us from, you know, having a village mentality to having a government mentality. And as we can see today, the United States government does not work, and it will not work for Indian country. And to take on those foreign policies or those foreign governments, it really is a detriment to our people. And so how we work today with that sovereignty in mind is, you know, we might never get back to that village or living in that way that we did, but there's way, because we are innovators, we are scientists, we are adapters, we are going to be able to adapt. But definitely food sovereignty and food security is at the helm of how we can get back to a more sovereign people. And we here in Hoopla, we realize that, especially with our dances, you know, a lot of our dances are to, you know, promote the acorns the next year, promote the fish the next year, you know. And so those are the things that we do. We you know, promote the deer and making sure that those things come back, because if they don't come back, you know, and we do with this pandemic have seen food flying off the shelves and not having it in stock. Some people are not having water shipped to them. They're not having different things. We're going to see more and more of that stuff. And we have to make sure that with sovereignty, our most vulnerable are taken care of, right? So food sovereignty means my elders, my children, they eat. And so that concept is like the forefront of what Indian people, you know, think about. And that's kind of, I guess, a little bit of, you know, the Indian Reorganization Act and having that go on, but also I just want the attendees and everybody to know that we Hoopla, we Native people, we are the only people in the world that have to register to our land by blood. And so what that means is we have a blood covenant with our land through the United States government. That is what they require of us, and that is how they recognize us. And so when we talk about land, it's really a difficult thing for us as Native people, especially when we're talking on a government to government relationship, because we don't quite see it the way that the rest of the world, our Western mentality, sees it. We see it a complete different way. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I hope I didn't take 20 minutes instead of 3.
Thank you so much, Meagan. It's wonderful response there. All right, Cheyenne, can you talk about strategies and approaches to tending to traditional land-based responsibilities within your community's ancestral territories, and the dynamics you face on public and private lands within these areas?
Thank you, Keir. So I'm going to pause right there. If I could have everybody who's part of the conference go ahead and close your eyes. And I want you guys to think of what you guys are having for dinner. And go ahead and open your eyes now. So most of you guys have probably already thought, I'm gonna have my steak tonight, my famous filet mignon recipe, my vegetables, and your bread. For a lot of people, that may be a Friday night dinner for a special occasion. In my community, when I drive to work every day, once a month, say this past week, I actually witnessed quite a few of my tribal members who line up to receive their commodity box. So USDA never considered or accounted for food allergens or nutritional value for a commodity box. But if you ever look up a Native American meme regarding commods, everybody could tell you how they love commodity cheese. So believe it or not, the system is rooted in the systematic racism that a lot of us experience on Native American reservations. So myself, I'm from a Native American reservation. So at the whim of a pen, the reservation can exist, or depending on who's president at the time or the policy that forms reservations, our identity and ourself and our food that we eat is really dependent upon federal legislation. So if you've ever had a chance to go to a Native American reservation, poverty is very common among our people. But that was at one time. We were very reliant upon our own, I guess, ecosystem. Our food was incorporated with our ecosystems. So commodity boxes are kind of a double-edged sword, because Friday night, families most likely will be eating an Indian taco versus steak and fresh fruits and vegetables, or a salad this evening. So most of the time, the poverty families that reside on the reservation are actually harming themselves for a lot of their health disparities. So commodity boxes are a double-edged sword, because they could help feed a single people and families that need food for the month, or help supplement other social service food programs that only provide enough income to support 1 or 2 shopping trips if you budget well. Whether it's a commodity box program, SNAP, WIC, or TANF program model, or formula used. In short, the policy is always inadequate and does not meet the family's food need. So if you have a family of 2 or 3 or 4, the nutritious food and access is not there. So about 10 or 11 years ago, I would say, I was on TANF. So farming really became a passion of mine, because there was never enough income for me to go get fresh fruits, vegetables. And I enjoyed salad, I enjoyed cucumbers, I enjoyed salsa, but who doesn't enjoy salsa these days, right? So I started farming. And what I've learned was it was in our DNA to farm. If we farm, we're able to lessen our health disparities. As I mentioned in my introduction, health disparities are the leading cause of mortality rates for American Indians. And if 2020 taught me anything, it surely cemented in my mind how important it is to pay attention to your health. Our health depends on the food we eat. So why not grow a garden, plant some trees, and learn to can and tend and harvest our indigenous food? This action will transition us out of relying solely on processed boxed food, our social service programs, and in my experience, only enable us to consume food and create diets that contribute to lessen the health disparities. So historically, we as Indigenous people had indigenous agriculture ecosystems, and prior to colonial contact, my ancestors were responsible stewards of Mother Earth. My ancestors have cultivated and tended to the fire, water, land, and air, and we had a relationship with all living things. Our food resources and our indigenous agriculture ecosystems were interwoven with our traditional responsibilities. As an Indigenous person and as a community, we strive to promote individuals to build for themselves. But how can we build for ourselves if we don't have a sustainable or resilient food system? In the pandemic, as Meagan mentioned, it really showed where we are a weakened system in California, since we only have one way in and one way out. A lot of our food staples were gone. So this past year, we, as a family and as a strategy for the tribes, we would go out and collect our lettuce from the land. We would collect our spinach from the land. We probably gathered more pine nuts this year and acorn than we have in past years, just because we didn't have necessarily access to meat this year. I don't have access to meat because traditionally we had a lot more deer. We had a lot more rabbit, and I didn't need a California permit to hunt or basically take my .22 shotgun out there and shoot a rabbit, which leads me into the area of our traditional territories and our responsibilities on both public and private land within these areas. We just don't have access to live that lifestyle because they're on private property. I can't go hunt rabbit without having a license, and without asking the owner's permission, and majority of the land ownership lies with the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. So believe it or not, they factor into whether I'm able to sustain my cultural ways of gathering willow and supplying water throughout our homeland, where we gather a lot of our watercress, where we gather a lot of our tidup, it's a nut grass, to sustain our diet. But it's also forming who we are in our identity. So approaches to traditional land-based responsibilities in our communities, it doesn't always lie within the tribe. It relies within the people of the tribe to tend to those lands. The problem is most of the people, they don't have access to these areas because, for better or worse, they just don't have transportation. They don't have access to these areas because boarding schools have had the mentality of kill the Indian, save the man. A lot of them don't have access to their culture. A lot of them don't have access to this indigenous knowledge that would allow them to tend to the land. So in this present day and age, I find myself, and I'm sure a lot of other indigenous people that are cultural bearers for their communities, actually are getting paid to install these values back into our people. So raising farms, I mean, I'm probably one who doesn't consider myself a farmer, but at the same time, we are active, my family, in growing orchards, growing vegetables, tending to the land. So that's one thing California fails to recognize in the agriculture industry, is that the indigenous people have long tended to the land, whether it be private or public. Secretly, we've always cared for the streams, we cared for the animals, we cared for our food resources, we gave our offering and our prayers in order for everything to be in balance. So if I could leave you guys with one thing that you gain from this conference, is that as an indigenous person, in order to find solutions, we have to proactively develop legislation that would allow us to have access to the private land, to have access to our Paiute, or which is water, to have access to the land, water, and the infrastructure that would allow us to continue to sustain that ecosystem versus diverting it to a larger city such as Los Angeles. So a lot of our reliance upon indigenous knowledge is slowly coming back into Western education. Unfortunately, there's this ongoing systematic racism that also prohibits us to have access to some of these areas because we don't have the financial means to acquire that private or public land, or to lease from the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, that would allow us to, say, grow our business or to become sustainable communities, because most of the reservations in the Owens Valley, they're landlocked. So you really have to be proactive as far as advocating for your tribal leaders in your tribes to start planning land management and strategies that allow us to gain access to these traditional territories, because whether you realize it or not, you're on an indigenous homeland. So at some point, someone is still taking care of that resource in order to, say, gather their willows or gather their taboos or their acorn and their pine trees, because that's on BLM or Forest Service land. So again, if I take away anything, is just from this conference, if you want to advocate for Native Americans and be allies, advocate for them in legislation, advocate for them in financial, financial environments that will open up opportunities for us to become tribal partnerships with those organizations. So Keir, hopefully that spoke to the community's ancestral territories and the dynamics some of us face here, at least here in the Owens Valley, in regards to land access on both private and public lands. Thank you.
Beautifully so. Thank you so much. Great. So yeah, this is the next several questions. There's 3 questions in this section, and I just want to kind of do a little time check. Want to make sure that we leave about 15 minutes or so for questions. The questions are definitely coming in. In case we don't answer every single question, make sure to leave my information, and anybody, any of our panelists that are interested in doing the same, we can do that. So we'll take this next section of time here, about 20 minutes or so to go through some of these questions. And we can just kind of march down the same order, starting with Chairman Lopez and Rick, and then Meagan and Cheyenne. Discuss your or your community's unique balance between traditional foodways, land tending, and conventional, including sustainable, organic, or regenerative agricultural pursuits. So the framing on that is, in the work that I do a lot, I see both happening within our tribal communities. There's strong pursuits in local food access and gardens and sustainable ag operations, and then a real strong pursuit towards traditional foodways as well. So turn that over to Chairman Lopez. Oh, you're on mute, sir.
Yeah, every time I go on mute, I need to be retrained. This is a difficult question for our tribe to answer because we are a federally unrecognized tribe. We own no tribal lands whatsoever. And we signed a treaty in 1851, and the state of California actually sabotaged that treaty by passing a resolution asking the US Senate and President to not ratify that treaty. And then they sent a delegation to lobby on behalf of those treaties not being signed. And that's what happened to our treaty. So we're a landless tribe. And beyond that, the cost of real estate in our territory is just outrageous. And our people, like the generation, just one generation of before me, very few members knew how to read or write. And so as the agriculture industry in our territory transitioned to industry, our people did not have the skills necessary or the desire really to function there. And so they ended up moving to the Central Valley where they could still do agricultural kinds of work. But we have been removed from our lands. And then the 3 periods of colonization also destroyed an incredible amount of our knowledge. The 3 periods of colonization wanted to destroy our indigenous knowledge, our culture, our spirituality. And after over 100 years of that intentional interest in destroying that knowledge, they were pretty darn successful. Today, the Amah Mutsun are working hard at restoring knowledge. That's why I love being here and listening to Miss Baldi and Miss Stone, because these are the people that we can learn from and that we need their help. And at the same time, we have other resources that we pull from. One of our last traditional leaders, fortunately, left 78,000 pages with the Smithsonian Institute. With the J.P. Harrington. And so we're still going through those notes to restore that knowledge. But we're in a restoration period now. We do not own land. But what we do have are MOUs and memorandums of agreement. And today we have access to over 140,000 acres. And so what we're doing is restoring our knowledge of our food, of our plant foods, for example. And on those 140,000, we do surveys and we try to identify where do they have good patches of our cultural resources so that we can work to enhance those patches and at the same time gather foods and stuff like that. So that's where our tribe is now. We don't have that continuous knowledge and continuous land source for us to continue our foodways, during that period of time. That right there has been a really big way, but we have enthusiasm with our members. Our members want to gain that knowledge back. Whenever we have gatherings and stuff like that, it's not unusual to get 50, 70, 100 people of tribal members there to participate. We held a food sovereignty conference 2 years ago. And we had, I believe, 80 tribal members there. And, you know, and we're sharing that, you know, and we have a stewardship core. And our stewardship core, we have approximately eight tribal youth working now on the lands. And they've been doing this for 5 years now to restore that knowledge and carry that knowledge. And so they can teach a future, you know, the current members and the future generations. So that's a lot of where we are now. So the traditional foodways have been lost, but we're working hard to restore and bring it back. Just this year, we're in the process. As a matter of fact, this weekend they're going to finish up our greenhouse, and we have 40,000. We got seed trays ready to go in with 40,000 seeds of our food plants going into that greenhouse, of different kinds of our grasslands and other plants, etc. And so, you know, and so that right there is the first really large effort to plant these to get these plants into the ground, and so that we can have food resources for the future. But we're really happy and proud that we have 40,000 seed trays going into the, not seed trays, but the seed plugs going into that greenhouse and be ready for planting soon. So we depend a lot on restoring that knowledge by talking to our neighboring tribes and from learning from others as well. And so I'm sitting here, I already took notes to get a hold of Ms. Stone and Ms. Baldi and say, let's sit, can we sit down and talk, you know? Because that's the knowledge we need to restore. And regarding the conventional, we know we need to do something in our tribe. I know whenever we get together, I mean, it's not unusual to see people missing limbs, people blind, and that was 20 years ago, more so than now because of the medicines and the surgeries they have nowadays for diabetes. But obesity, diabetes, heart disease, it's just rampant in our tribe, and we all know that we need to make some changes and some differences. So as I said, what we have is a lot of enthusiasm. We also have a youth leadership core that we're developing to carry on that work for generations to come. Thank you, Keir.
Thank you so much, sir. Excellent. We'll go to Meagan. Again, restating the question, discuss yours or your community's unique balance between traditional foodways and land tending and conventional, including sustainable, organic, or regenerative agriculture pursuits.
Well, just before I stop, Mr. Lopez, and then all the attendees out there, I do a page, it's called Cooking Healthy in Indian Country on Facebook. And on that page, there's a lot of like how to process acorns, how to can deer meat, how to can like tons of different stuff. So it's a free resource. A lot of it is, done because I am a master food preserver with, food safety and all that knowledge and embedded into that. So it's called Cooking Healthy in Indian Country. You can go and check it out. It's on Facebook. And then I have a YouTube channel.
Oh, Meagan, we're losing your audio.
So the way that in our community, we've been approaching it so through the Klamath Trinity Resource Conservation District. We do a lot of food security, food sovereignty initiative. You can grow kale and kohlrabi and dye. Is that better?
A lot better. Yeah, I think the video needs to come off at this point.
Okay. So, one of the things that we're really working on is, teaching people full circle, not only just to plant things, but how do you eat it? You know, like what do I do with kale? What do I do with kohlrabi? What do I do with these things? You know, and doing that, you know, teaching people like, hey, here's a recipe. I always like to tell people, don't just throw everything out of your cupboard and then bring all these foods in. You know, you can add to what you're already doing. So I'll take like salmon and kale and make like a salmon kale stir fry, or salmon patties with kale in it, or, you know, take different foods and put them in foods that are very familiar. Like I've taken chard and made chard tacos and just different things to get people to eating them. We see that as a way to kind of bring that food economy or that food cycle into place, and also how to preserve those foods. So like with our traditional foods too, how we gather, how we process, and how we preserve those foods is super important, you know, because we want to be able to extend the shelf life of all food, you know. And so we teach those things because we want that to be not only a practice, you know, just for our community, but just the sustainability of that is important, because we waste so much food in America today. You know, homes are throwing food out left and right, and, you know, making sure that you can basically stretch that food out as far as you can is important. But I have 6 kids. And so it's super important to me to have the ability to grow food, gather food, fish food, hunt food, and preserve those foods. Because if I do not, you know, then I have to come out of pocket a lot to feed my family. And we're all a part of this food cycle in our home. You know, my sons, they raise pigs. They help butcher those pigs. I do a lot of the cooking. We garden. I do a lot of the canning with the garden. You know, when we gather, I do a lot of the canning with the gathering that we bring back. And it's a food cycle, and it's a lot of the ways that we teach our community by doing exactly what we practice in our own home. And I think that makes an important impact. If people can see you doing it as a part of who you are, they're more able to take that and take that into themselves, because they see it's a benefit to you and your family. So that's the way that we're kind of maintaining those traditional values around food, because it is super important. And, you know, our people, we do not like the waste of food, you know, and that's something that is super important, because we know the resources or how the earth gave us that food, and we don't want to waste that, especially when we take a life. If we're taking a life, that life is important because that life was given to give us life. And so we want those values in our children, we want those values in our community, because they are the ones that are going to value these things when we're gone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meagan. Great. Cheyenne, that question as well. Discuss your community's unique balance between traditional foodways and land tending and conventional, including sustainable, organic, regenerative agricultural pursuits.
So the tribe that I work for, our approach is actually a bit different. So the approach is through economic development, because economic development will allow us to create the infrastructure needed for these food systems. So we've taken an interest in building and diversifying the tribe's income through that way, because what that will allow us to do is to create the wells that are needed, to create the irrigation that's needed. The tribe I also work for, the Fort Independence tribe, is the only tribe in the Owens Valley that has its water rights. So a major thing that we're doing to actively advocate and restore some of our tribal knowledge as well as our food system is developing a reservoir, because you factor in climate change, these are going to be needs, not short term, but for long-term use. And a reservoir in the Owens Valley would be significant for the tribe that holds 560 acres, because we will be able to control and irrigate the land in the orchards that will sustain the food for the local tribe. For myself, independently, for Big Pine, I guess it's not necessarily a tribal approach. It's more of monkey see, monkey do. So the more people I could I guess, advocate for farming, say growing one tomato bush, and then one tomato bush turns into 2 tomato bushes, 3 tomato bushes. I personally give out seeds each year for families that are interested in growing pumpkins and Armenian cucumbers and squash and zucchini, because those are really hard plants to kill in my experience. So once you start allowing other communities and tribal members from, say, that one reservation or the 2 reservations to grow their own food produce, it gets them into, next thing you know, they're growing chickens because they like fresh eggs, but allows them to gain access to not only fresh fruits and vegetables, but it allows them to connect with Mother Earth. It allows them to gain therapeutic ways from gardening, and it also allows them to offset some of their income. So right now, for both the Big Pine Paiute tribe and the Fort Independence Reservation, I know that we're always advocating for policy and for funding to put toward those tribes and toward those tribal individuals, because at the end of the day, I, as well as my community, we can't always afford a match, or we can't always afford to do an EQIP grant, because it's based on a system that is for people that are already well off. Say, if I need $30,000 for an EQIP grant, I don't necessarily have $30,000 in my account, let alone my credit, that I would be able to get reimbursed through for that grant. So again, our communities need advocates in all facets of the government, and from small farms to big farms, to advocate for these Indigenous communities, because we don't necessarily have the startup funds or the organizations that advocate for us to build that capacity in order for us to actually sustain a livelihood. And yeah, I think that covers my answer for that question. So
Great, thank you so much. All righty, we have reached lightning round, folks. So in order to cover a few more of these, if we can be thinking to the tune panelists of maybe just a couple of sentence summation, that would be really great, because the 2 remaining questions are very important to the overall topics outlined in this panel. But again, if you can be thinking on the framing of 2 to 3 sentences, just like little succinct pieces, so that we can just fire down the last few and then still have time for some questions, because they have been, I think there's some folks eagerly awaiting some response there. So, so with the last a little bit of time, we're talking just a couple minutes to, a piece, or excuse me, total. From your perspectives, what's missing from the conversation around contemporary regenerative agriculture and food systems movements? So, again, huge buzzwords there. Again, from your perspectives, unique perspectives, what's missing? The last one, and we can kind of maybe put them all together in terms of your responses here. What does equitable partnership look like in relationship to developing, engagement with non-native entities and individuals in that regenerative, sustainable ag food systems sector? So again, what's missing from the conversation, and then what would you consider equitable partnership to look like? So again, I'll turn that over to Chairman Lopez, and then we'll just kind of fire off with just a few sentences apiece, if you all would.
Well, what's missing from the conversation is the traditional native foods of California. I mean, I know in our, whenever during those tribes that were affected by the missions, when they came in, they thought our food resources were completely inferior to the European foods. And at the same time, they saw how close we were related to our foods, and they wanted to break that relationship with our plants. And so I think what's missing today is the effort to restore traditional Native American California food. That's a big part. And then 2 other quick parts, and very fast, is restoring sacredness to the land. Who talks about restoring sacredness to the land? But that food is sacred. Mother Earth is sacred. We have to work to restore sacredness to the land and taking care of that plant community, so that we don't have that the monocrops of just one crop. The plants have a responsibility to take care of a full community. I'll stop there, Keir.
Really appreciate it. And all these topic areas, I just got to state this acknowledgement. We're talking about deep and important and meaningful topic areas, and we're not doing things justice with this condensed time frame. So I really appreciate all the panelists being receptive to at least providing new vantage points on these topics. And I think everybody's very open to continuing to engage in these conversations because, yeah, they're absolutely warranted. All right, Meagan.
I guess I would say the things that are missing from the conversation is the fact that Indigenous foods are way different than farm foods, right? And we hold those in a value that is not really monetary, right? We look at those foods as basic food gifts to our home, life to our home. We don't look at it with a monetary value. And I think that is really hard to get across to people that in contemporary ag or just getting across in general. And so I think that's something that's missing from the conversation. And also, you know, if we're going to do partnerships with non-native organization, we need to be a beginning thought, not an afterthought. And that would be just my couple sentences.
Thank you so much. Cheyenne?
Can you repeat the one more question? I got caught up in her answer.
Absolutely. So what's missing from the conversation around, you know, contemporary regenerative agriculture and food systems movements currently underway? And then also what's equitable partnership and relationship development with non-native entities and individuals in these spaces look like?
Just to keep it short and sweet, it's going to come down to policy. It's going to come down to financial ability. And as far as partnerships, I recommend to always consult with the tribes, but I also recommend if you're looking to create a space for Indigenous people, it's finding those mover and shakers in those communities that could advocate on behalf of everybody. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. You covered just amazing sets of territories with your responses, and you know, just really appreciate your hearts that were lent to this process here. All right, so let's open it up for questions. They've been mounting. I'm not sure if we'll get to everybody. If panelists are open to providing a way in which folks, please share that with panelists and attendees in the chat. Any kind of information you'd like to share that way. And so attendees, please be looking in the chat there. You might get some information shared. Okay, so from the top, let's see. We're looking, let's see. Okay, so anybody have any information on native plants used by Indigenous tribes in the San Diego County area, specifically around Ramona? It's a Southern California related inquiry. Is anybody connected in there?
So just my experience, you always want to reach out to the tribes, and the person who probably has the most knowledge would be an elder or their tribal historic preservation officer, not from San Diego County, but those are always good resources to look up to gain knowledge about Indigenous plants.
Okay, so I think my internet got unstable too, but if everybody can still hear me, Cheyenne, I see your face. Can you give me a thumbs up if I'm still audible? Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, and I can field that a little bit. I would recommend folks check out the Climate Science Alliance. They have a tribal working group down there in San Diego County, and they're focusing on a lot of like traditional plant restoration areas in coordination with tribal representatives and tribal staff from a lot of the tribal communities in that area. Again, Climate Science Alliance. Alrighty, next question. Having been on your own land or reservation, but still having contact with those who don't partake in your practices, what is the largest issue you face agriculturally you know, so no respect for the land as an example, or not taking your advice seriously, or something along those lines, are kind of providing some topics to maybe think about. Cheyenne.
So I'm going to hint, because our biggest one is access to water and the threat of climate change. So without water, it's really hard to sustain our communities' agriculture without the access and the infrastructure to water. So that is probably our biggest issue right now.
Thank you. Chairman Lopez.
Down in our territory, you know, a lot of those strawberry farms and stuff like that, they're still going heavy on the pesticides, and they're damaging the water and the whole ecosystem down there, and it seems like they, you know, they're just putting profit above taking care of Mother Earth and stuff like that, and it's doing tremendous damage.
Thank you so much.
I would guess too, like in our area, one of the things that is really hard is we get a lot of kids that are academians, and like, you know, some of them might have, you know, biology degrees, and, you know, they'll come and they'll tell us things about medicinals or plants that we have traditionally used for thousands and thousands of years, and they'll tell us something totally contrary to that. And then they're not open to listening to our own facts that we have of 10,000 plus years knowledge. That's always a hard thing to take in, and I try to be as respectful as possible, but that is one of the pet peeves of my life. But yeah, that's probably one of them.
Thank you all so much. All right, next question. So can someone speak to the differences between wild plants versus domesticated plants? I guess each of your unique framings on those two areas. Go ahead, Chairman Lopez.
Well, you know, we don't look at it as wild plants. We don't use that term. Our plants are not wild. You know, they were very well cared for and taken care of and managed and stewarded. And then regarding when you have the domesticated plants, I mean, it's an attempt to do what man has always done, is to try and dominate. You know, you dominate other human beings, you dominate our rivers, you dominate our mountains by extraction, you dominate all the resources. And that's just another, you know, when and then so domesticating our plants and stuff like that is just efforts to dominate our relatives, because we see these plants as our relative. And how, you know, and how can someone try, you know, work to dominate a relative? I just don't get it. So that, you know, so that's my answer, is just attempting to get at something that's really unnatural for that plant, just trying to force them into it.
Thank you so much. Meagan or Cheyenne, anything to add, or shall we move on to another question?
My biggest thing is I know when my family does consultation work in Mercury, the scientists are always telling us that these invasive plants are growing. And as Mr. Lopez expressed, we've never seen it as invasive plants. We've always seen that there's a balance, and the balance may be out of whack. That's why the invasive plants are taking over. So my biggest thing is we adapt to that environment. Same with our plants, same with our resources. Our food will always adapt to that environment. We might have to change our diet for some of the plants that are lacking our water and factoring in climate change. So I didn't ever really see a difference. It was just what the land was there to offer is what we utilized.
Thank you so much.
I would just say that, you know, the amount of counterfeit to food nowadays is crazy. You know, you take corn, for instance, you know, it's been counterfeited to the point that it's not really corn, right? And so a lot of our indigenous foods, you know, and I see this all over. When we went to Hawaii, you know, the banana comes to mind, and how they've counterfeited that so much to where it's at now. And I think we're finally seeing in America, with the rise of cancer and the rise of different diseases, that these counterfeit foods are not working. So, you know, when we talk about, wild foods or food, we should be really saying real food, right? That's all real food right there. And basically, I think that's the difference that I would say. A lot of these domesticated plants are either hybrid, GMO, you know, and if we grow, we usually try to go organic or heirloom. And that's because, you know, so much food is, we don't even know what it is.
Thank you so much. Let's see, would you endorse reforestation and agroforestry as sustainable strategies to address our losses of biodiversity and need for carbon capture? Care to field that one?
Well, I can do my best here with this one. You know, certainly reforestation, agroforestry would play its role. But you know, what's missing from that conversation is the role of our native grasslands. Native grasslands have been found to be incredibly biodiverse. They also sequester carbon as well. The coastal prairies here in California are some of the most biodiverse ecosystems in the world. And so I think when a lot of people think of, you know, carbon sequestration, you know, trees instantly come to mind. And I think there's a lot of recent research that's coming out that show that grasslands can be just as important for that purposes. You know, because of the indigenous, you know, fire regimes that were found here at contact, you know, the Spanish didn't describe, you know, thickets of conifers in any place in California that they encountered. They described open park-like forests filled with mature trees that were dotted by shrubs. And so I think, you know, in terms of reforesting, those are the types of forests that we should be advocating for, the ones that are managed through traditional ecological knowledge and fire, where mature old growth trees can thrive, and the biodiversity found underneath those trees can thrive as well.
Thank you all so much. We're rounding out, probably about 1 minute and 30 seconds left in this section. And so if everybody's all right with it, I'll go to one final question. Let's see. Let's see. There's so much. Yeah, again, and I apologize. We're not going to get to probably a fraction of all these questions. This is wonderful that we have so much engagement. Let's see. So this one's interesting. They're all great. But how can my food business find indigenous farmers to support and buy from? We don't want to.
So my biggest thing is visit the communities, visit the tribal communities. Some communities have farmer markets. That's the best way to buy, in my experience.
I agree with Cheyenne. Best way, visit the tribal communities. A lot of people in, you know, these communities are very, very, have very specialized things, like specialized jams, specialized, you know, baked goods, specialized vegetables. I mean, if you go to a tribal community, there's so much diversity in food there that, you know, it's awesome to just check it out.
This is Keir. I'll go ahead and put so Intertribal Agriculture Council runs the American Indian Foods Program, which helps to market both domestically and internationally native made and produced food products. There's definitely a handful of tribal food companies in California in particular that participate in the program, but then there's also a great opportunity to, you know, support tribal food companies from all over the country here. So I'll put that information into this chat here shortly. And that rounds us out. We're right at the top of that hour and 30-minute mark. And so I want to just thank everyone for your time and attention and what you lent, you know, your expertise. And I think about our indigenous framings around knowledge exchange, and you know, you're imparting information that in some instances is thousands and thousands of years old. So I just acknowledge that and really appreciate your time and attention, and as participants in taking this in, and also, of course, to our esteemed panelists here. I will turn it back over to Paul.
Thanks, Keir. Thanks, Keir, and all of our panelists. Yeah, thanks to everyone for joining us late on a Friday afternoon. Really appreciate you taking the time to have the conversation with us. Again, Keir Johnson-Reyes with the Intertribal Ag Council. And we do have 2 more days of conference left. So please do join workshops through the weekend, our celebration on Sunday evening, where we'll be giving out some awards, acknowledging leadership on agriculture across California, as well as particularly paying homage to this month, Black History Month, and some speakers there with Nikki Silvestri speaking from Sun and Shadow. Please take a moment to, when you get it, to fill out the workshop evaluation. So you'll see that in an email coming from CAF staff. Take a moment, if you can, to visit the virtual expo hall and just check out our sponsors that allow us to actually finance a conference like this, even virtually. And if you are able, feel free to make a contribution to CAF to allow us to do that. So again, yeah, just thanks to everyone. Thanks, Keir, Meagan, Cheyenne, Rick, Chairman Lopez, everyone for being here, and see you soon.
Thank you all.